do. Baby Reed.
Hold on.
If you tell me right now to play,
I don't even have a battery issue.
You don't need one.
What's your battery?
You don't got nothing. You just said you sit in traffic.
You have nothing.
You just said
You got it here because of my name.
Cause you got it.
All right, everyone. Welcome to an edition of the Wall Street Journal podcast. We've gotten through 6 months of regular season basketball, and now finally the playoffs are here. And I got Nishant on the line with me. What's up, dude?
Hey man, how's it going?
It's good. I'm excited for this weekend, especially the first round. It's like the first day on Saturday and Sunday. It's like 4 games on each day, so it's like the greatest time for an NBA fan.
Love it. I love this time of the year. Although the games aren't always the most competitive, the players are always trying their hardest.
Yeah, at least teams are actually trying and not just being like, hey, it's the regular season, whatever. But before we get into some of these playoffs matchups, I think last night was pretty exciting in the sense that I remember we wanted to do this pod earlier, but the problem was none of the matchups were set till the end of last night, and the only one that was set before last night's game was Indiana at Boston. And do you see that crazy comeback? Portland came back from 26 down. 26. Yeah, and they only played 6 players all game, and none of them were their top players, and they still beat Sacramento. Wasn't
one of them a 10 day contract kind of guy, or some D-League guy that they just brought up for the game?
Yeah, the player, I checked the box score, and it was all these some of these players I knew from college, but they played at one of them. Gary Trent played at Duke, and some of these players I've heard of, but I was like, oh my god. But Sacramento also did this weird thing where they played all their starters in the first half, their big guys like Fox and Buddy, and they scored more than 80 points in the first half. Then for some reason they just rested them for the second half.
Yeah, maybe they knew it's because Dave Yeager was going to get fired, so he's like, fuck it, might as well go out in the blaze of glory, right?
Yeah, I guess they were like, oh, we got to fire the coach tomorrow, so let's just rest the starters in the second half so we can just say he went out with the loss and fire him.
Yeah.
And then the other one was the Nuggets were down 11 with 2 or 3 minutes to go, and they went on a 15-0 run to win the game and clinch the 2 seed. Some of this most incredible game 82 of the season that I've seen.
Yeah, this is the most interesting last 5 days of the NBA season in a while, I think. Both because the games were really competitive, but also all these trademark, Dirk Nowitzki's last home game, Dwayne Wade's last home game, Dirk Nowitzki getting an amazing reception in San Antonio where he, battled for years and years. And then Dwayne Wade getting a triple-double on his last game ever. I mean, this is just incredible, basketball. Mostly because we're starting to get older, and these are players that have defined our basketball career so far.
Exactly. And I mean, it's just incredible with the storylines that we saw, and then all the off-court stuff that's been going on. But I think that's that's for another pod. All this off-court drama, we'll get to that when we get to the off season. But we finally have some basketball to talk to, so I think we'll go through these 8 playoff matchups. We'll just alternate, I'll pick one, you pick one, and we'll just go from what we think is probably the least competitive to the most competitive and just cycle through them. So I'll start off. I think the least competitive is probably going to be Bucks and Pistons in the East. Don't really see any prospects for the Pistons here, especially with Blake being injured, and Bucks are dominant. I mean, they're going to be missing Mirotic and Brogdon, but I still think it's going to be a sweep. I don't really see any chances for the Pistons. What about you?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think Detroit started coming apart at the seams at the end of the season. I mean, I think Blake Griffin, who I think should be an All-NBA player because of what he's done to this almost sorry team to drag them along. He's essentially has no leg. I mean, I think he's doing things that in other years I feel he would have just sat out because these games wouldn't have been consequential. But because he's in Detroit and they made that big trade, they don't want to bench him.
Exactly, and I think Detroit achieved what it kind of wanted to when it made the Blake Griffin trade. Is that they weren't a playoff team. Now they're a playoff team. Blake Griffin, he played at an All NBA level. It seems like he'll probably make one of the probably All NBA 13 this year. But they played really well in February, March, and it was oh, this is going to be a 6 seed, and then Brooklyn and Orlando somehow just overtook them, and then now they're stuck with the Bucks. I mean, not that I think they would have, like, even if they were 7th or 6th seed, they would have taken out one of those top 4 seeds, but it's still a good season for Detroit. This is why they got Dwayne Casey, Blake Griffin. Not everyone can win a championship, and some teams at the end of the day just want to even make the playoffs because the owner, like, it helps them, like, with the money situation, extra playoff games. So I think it's a good story for Detroit. But hopefully, I'm sure the Bucks are just going into this series wanting to finish it as quickly as possible so that they could get healthy and get some rest.
Yeah, I think the biggest storyline for this series, really, for me, is what Giannis does in the playoffs. I mean, I think there's always been that idea that Giannis has grown a lot in the regular season, hasn't been able to show that in the playoffs. But now he has a good system around him. This is his team. He has a couple of guys that are missing, but can he take the next leap to not go from just being the likely MVP, but to being the face of the NBA, becoming the LeBron James of the East now?
Yeah, last year we saw with Giannis against the Celtics where he looked good, but his team just didn't perform up to his level at certain times. But this year now he's got a little bit more help, like with the signings of Brook Lopez. And I think that should definitely help. And I think the biggest difference for Milwaukee at the end of the day was their coach. The upgrade from Kidd and Joe Prunty last year to Budenholzer now has made all the difference in the world for this team. And he's been in the playoffs before, like Budenholzer, so he's taken a team to the Eastern Conference Finals. I mean, granted that they got swept by LeBron at that time, but still, I think this is what Budenholzer is good at. He's good at maximizing his teams, and the one advantage he does have now is he probably has the best player in every series in these playoffs.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this would be really disappointing if this becomes more than, I would say, a 4 to 5 game series. I would be pretty disappointed in Milwaukee. I think ultimately, I agree with you. I think this is going to be a sweep.
Yeah, it should be a sweep. If the Pistons somehow get a game, I think it'll be a miracle. But I think that's pretty much covered this series. It shouldn't be too big of a deal. So who do you want to focus on now?
Yeah, I think the next, I'm going to stay in the Eastern Conference. I think the next series that I'm looking forward to seeing, but I really think it's going to be a quick series, is the Toronto-Orlando series. I think Orlando is another team that sort of for years has been the tanking team, hasn't really made any moves. Really since the Dwight Howard years, they haven't made any significant run in the playoffs. And I think their goal this year, after acquiring so many assets for a long time, was to make that playoff push. And we saw that they didn't fold when things got tough, and they kept pushing on, and they have a bunch of young guys that are learning how to win and learning how to play. They finished with a winning record. This must be the first time in 10 years that they finished with a winning record, 42-40. But unfortunately, I mean, I think Toronto is probably the most complete defensive team. I know Milwaukee has been the best defensive team in the regular season, but if you look at the top 5 starting guys for Toronto, I mean, where's the weakness on defense? Kyle Lowry, historically a pretty good defender, has been injured this year. You look at, number 2, if you have Danny Green out there as your number 2, he's the best transition defensive player in the league. If you got Pascal Siakam or Kawhi Leonard at the 3 and 4 respectively, I mean, those guys are amazing defenders. And then now they have Marc Gasol, who's, I think, that was the weakness for Toronto in the past, was that they didn't have a big guy. But Marc Gasol, I mean, he's a little bit of a shell of himself in terms of defensive player of the year, but he's no scrub.
And the crazy part is all these guys, we didn't even talk about someone like OG Anunoby. I mean, granted, not with much success, but it's just Toronto is just if they want sometimes at the 5 they could play and they could even move shifts sometimes. So Toronto really has no defense. But I guess one I wanted to ask you was, I don't know if you saw this stat where since February 1st, Orlando was the number 1 team in defensive efficiency. So do you think that was one of those fluke stats, schedule based on schedule, or do you think this Orlando Magic can actually be a good defensive team?
I mean, I think they have the versatility in their players to have a good defensive team, right? They have the wing players who have large wingspans, who can really go out there and play some good defense. Now, ultimately, do I think that that's going to transition into playoff defense? I don't think so. I think that in some ways I would have to look at their strength of schedule, but I'm sure some of it was strength of schedule. I think some of it was playing teams on nights when, you know, the teams that had less to play for were maybe not playing as hard or not going 100%. I mean, I think Orlando has surprised me this regular season. I didn't think that they were going to be as good as they turned out to be. I thought it was going to be another one of those years where, like, they can't put anything together. They don't have a good identity, but they do. They are a pretty good defensive team. And in their defense, like, I don't think Toronto is the unstoppable offensive juggernaut that I think some of the other top teams in the East and West are. I think Toronto is very methodical and they can be very good, but I don't think they have. Kawhi is really great, but I don't think they have like a lights out guy who can take over games quite the way that some of the other superstars can, offensively speaking.
Yeah, that's true. And the real test for Toronto in the past is, like, we've seen that this team can get past the first round and they could beat these lower tier teams. All year they've been saying, like, the reason that they made this trade for traded away DeRozan, their franchise guy, for Kawhi is for the later rounds in the playoffs when they didn't have like that player. Like, now they have a former Finals MVP, someone who we think is. I mean, we've seen that he could be better than DeRozan at his max level. So the question is, like, will he be there playing at his max level in the playoffs, or is he kind of checked out if he knows that he's going to go to the Clippers anyways? And, you know, he's not been playing a lot of, like, consecutive games. I mean, granted, in the playoffs, there's always 1 or 2 days between games, but I wonder how that'll affect Kawhi. But I think with this series, it shouldn't be too much of a problem for Toronto. It'll be the next round where I think it'll be more interesting. Did you want to hit on anything else on this series, or are we good?
No, I think I imagine this is going to be a 4 to 5 game series as well.
Yeah, I think I'll probably take the Raptors in 5, maybe. What about you?
Yeah, I think I would say Raptors in 5 as well.
All right. So the next series I think we could hit is in the West, the Warriors and Clippers, the 1-8 matchup here. So the Warriors, I guess, like, they didn't win. Like, they still ended up not winning less than 60 games this year, which I thought they should hit. But I think a lot of the similar things that kind of affected them last year hit them again this year, with just players not as interested, some injuries, players resting. And the Draymond KD stuff in middle, but ultimately they rebounded, got the number 1 seed, and I think this is the best possible matchup for the Warriors. They wanted this matchup in the sense that the travel will be easy, they get to stay in the state, and they know that they can own the Clippers. Like, the Clippers are a nice story, especially in the regular season. They'll work hard, and they're a hard-working team, well coached, but in the playoffs, like, they don't I mean, Lou Williams is their, like, quote-unquote superstar, but I think it's like he's not on the level of like what the talent that the Warriors have. So I don't think this should be too much trouble for them anyways.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that finally the team's going to be 100% locked in. I'm interested to see how they're going to incorporate Boogie, because I feel like over the last like 3 or 4 weeks, they've been ascending the role of Boogie, and the numbers for some of the other players have taken a hit. Boogie's, routinely been at like getting 20 points a game recently, but I wonder if in the playoffs they're going to revert back to the old school play, which is like, more outside in instead of inside out basketball.
That's a good point, especially in the closing moments of playoffs games. I think we all can agree that the Hamptons 5 lineup is what's been so successful for them in the past, and like how someone like Boogie going to take that. I think he'll have to accept the fact that those 5 are the ones who've closed playoff games together in the past, have won 2 championships. So, but it's always interesting when a guy like Boogie, who's sometimes emotional, how will he handle not being in the game? And a lot of times he's someone who they can scheme out of a game, and he's not that great defensively. So that's a good point. I didn't think about that, actually.
Yeah, this is the first season where I think they're going into the playoffs without a completely unified identity. Like, I feel like there's different puzzles to what the Golden State Warriors have been this year. There's been time where they've been Steph's team. There's been time they've been KD's team. There's been times where they've been Boogie's team. So like now it's time to figure out what their real identity is and if they can find it. And then the biggest thing is, I think if they are to have any losses in this playoffs, some of it might be self-inflicted because now they're almost playing them against the referees at least a little bit, because they've shown that they haven't been able to hold their composure, and we really have to see what this team comes out to be like. Are they going to complain the whole time? Especially because I think the Clippers are a pretty get under your skin kind of team. You know, they're going to do things that are going to annoy you. I imagine Pat Beverly is going to try to do a couple of things to get Stephen Curry in compromising positions, you know. And so are they going to be able to take that, or are people going to start getting ejected, which is awful in the playoffs because the implications can be very high, even missing just one game. We know that from when they lost the Warriors, when Draymond missed that one pivotal game in the finals.
Exactly. A couple years ago where Pat Beverly got under Steph Curry's skin. It was like, even from like what Beverly does, and you know, it's the Clippers are one of those teams where like their Warriors are going to come out with some like nicks and wounds after this series for sure, because the Clippers like they just...
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, I think I'm actually really, this is the first time I think a Golden State Warriors first round series I'm actually interested in watching, rather than just, you know, knowing that they're going to be crushing the opponent. I think they might win by a lot, but I'm interested to see who are the Warriors this year.
It'll be interesting, yeah. I mean, so many storylines, but I mean, yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but I still can't believe that them and the Rockets possibly are going to face off in the semifinals this year after that epic conference finals last year.
Yeah.
But I mean, they have to get through the Clippers. We've already seen that. I don't know if you saw in like the second to last game or the last game at the Pelicans, like Steph Curry turned an ankle.
Yeah, he did.
They minimized the injury, said it's not a big deal. Steve Kerr said that, you know, he'll be ready for game one, but you know, this is how these series turn quickly. Like, you know, he even if it's a lightly sprained ankle and he's playing on it, maybe he like turns it again, and that's how the whole series can change. So you never know.
And we know that that's his Achilles heel, his ankles, no pun intended. But like that's what plagued him the early part of his career, and why when you see his ankles when he plays the games now, he's wearing braces on both sides.
Yep. All right. So what series do you want to hit on next?
I think the next least competitive series, as much as I think it's going to be very exciting, I think Philadelphia-Brooklyn is probably the least exciting. And I think that's really only for one reason, which is there's no one on Brooklyn that can stop Joel Embiid. And so I think Joel Embiid, if he can play any games, I know he's going to be a little bit hurt in the beginning of the series. I don't think he's going to miss the whole series, but he may, you know, have limited time or may miss the first couple games. But I just think that he's too much of a force for Brooklyn. And as much as I like Jared Allen, I think he struggles with the big physicality that Joel Embiid brings.
Yeah, that's the only concern for the Sixers, pretty much, if Joel Embiid is going to be able to play or not. I mean, the fact that Elton Brand said that he should be ready, like, it's almost like a maybe. It's not the way he said it. I don't know if that's just to, like, kind of throw off the opponent. And, you know, maybe it's like, oh, Joel may not play, like, kind of playing games with the opponent. But he has been rested towards the second half of the season for, like, quote-unquote load management and, like, left knee soreness. So maybe it's something worse than what it actually is, and they're just not letting us on to what it is. But that's really the only concern. I mean, if you go through both teams and list like the best players in this series, it's probably like Embiid, Simmons, Butler, then maybe like D'Angelo, and then like Tobias Harris. So like the Sixers have like 4 out of the 5 best players in this series, and then if you add like Redick, so probably like 5 out of the 6 best players. So the talent is there, just that the Sixers haven't played that many games together with their starting lineup. So it's like, are they going to mesh in the playoffs? That's like my only concern.
Yeah, and then the other thing is, like, I think Brooklyn has an identity when they are trying to close out games. I don't think Philadelphia has that identity. I mean, they have done the classic, give it to Jimmy Butler, let him do his thing. They've won a couple of games like that with heroics. They really just shy away from anything Ben Simmons at the end of the game. They do like give it to Embiid and let him run down the clock with his back to the basket, old school basketball, which works with some efficiency. But I think if it came to a coaching decision, I think Kenny Atkinson is a much more creative offensive coach than Brett Brown. And I think that that's ultimately the weakest part of Philadelphia is, I think, their coaching.
Yeah, it's very suspect. I think if you go back to that Boston and Philly series last year, towards the end of the game, like Brad Stevens had his team like way more prepared and ready than Brett Brown.
Yeah.
And the Sixers just didn't know how to close out those games, and maybe that's where Jimmy Butler comes through now. We'll see. You said you can't go to Simmons. He can't shoot a jump shot or a free throw. So, like, how are you going to go to him at the end of the game? So, let's.
Yeah, I hope that he does, for the sake of the city that I live in.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
No, I think I do want to see one other thing from Brooklyn, which is, I think this is the playoff appearance where they can really show the free agents what they're made of. I mean, they're a bunch of young guys, but they play very, very well and very, very unified. And I think Sandeep and I talked about in the last pod about how much fun they are to watch. And if they can continue that, they can show that they are the fun team to watch and to be with and to be around. I think they can hopefully be able to attract some free agents that they haven't been able to in the past.
Good point. Yeah, I mean, they have a good roster, like a lot of young players and players on controllable contracts, and like not like a bunch of max players. So
yeah,
a free agent can slide in there and just like he would have like a team around him, and I think that's attractive. But I think, like you said, a playoff performance, like even if they take the Sixers to 7 games, I think that would make them a more attractive team going into free agency.
And even if they don't, if the Sixers, who have 2 guys that are going to be free agents this offseason, right, and Tobias Harris and Jimmy Butler, if those guys just look across the court and see the other team having a lot more fun, I mean, what's not to say that they won't try to jump ship, like when KD saw the Warriors having a lot of fun in that Western Conference Finals 3 years ago, 4 years ago? No, 3 years ago.
2016, yeah.
Yeah, so what's not to say that Jimmy Butler is not going to look over and be like, hey, maybe I want to run with the guys in Brooklyn.
He could. He very well could. It's just whether Brooklyn would want him at that point.
Yeah, if anyone wants him.
All right. So let's get to the next series. So I think the next one I'm going to go with is... we'll go with Denver and San Antonio. Very interesting series. I know a lot of people, like the things that just like reading stuff and listening to stuff, a lot of people are speculative about Denver just because of their youth and lack of playoff experience, except for Paul Millsap and Isaiah Thomas. And IT doesn't play, so it doesn't really matter. So people are they're like, oh, it's only Paul Millsap with playoff experience. Will that matter? But I just feel like sometimes, when a team has like done well throughout the year, especially Denver in the Western Conference, and there's just like they have way more talent and depth than the Spurs, because starting with Jokic, Murray, Harris, Barton, like you just go through their team and you're like, this is a better team than San Antonio. The only difference is the coaching, where Pop has a huge advantage on Malone and the experience. But how much of emphasis do you think we should place on the lack of experience for Denver?
Well, I think the problem with the lack of experience for Denver is, I think that as much as I like Jokic, I think he's a schemable player. And so I think having
so what do you
a guy
mean? What do you mean by like that, like schemable?
Like, I think he has very evident defensive inefficiencies and lapses that someone can target and tire him out offensively. He's also a big guy who has a really nice basketball game, but requires the ball quite frequently, whether it's his playmaking or whether it's his back to the basket sort of basketball play. And so I think Pop is the enemy of that, which is he can scheme out any one player. Now what that leaves is very, very competent players like Murray and Harris. The only problem that I see with Murray, Harris, and Barton, who I think would be arguably their next 3 best players, is that they're all pretty inconsistent. And so that's why I think that this series is a lot more interesting. I think Denver probably will pull it out just because of the sheer talent. But I think they're vulnerable because if either of those 3 guys are in a cold streak and Pop has done what he always does and takes the best player out of the other side, then what's left? What's left? What are they? How are they going to be able to bounce back from that? Are they going to need to bring IT off the bench to get some offensive production? I don't know.
Okay, so I think that makes sense. And now I kind of see what like what you mean by like the Jokic scheming. But I kind of do like the Denver home court advantage. I think it's one of those home court that's actually, like, when you say home court advantage, they actually do have a real advantage with the altitude there. And, the Spurs do have more playoff experience, but let's take someone like DeRozan. Yeah, he's been in the playoffs, but we've seen that his track record in the playoffs is pretty spotty. It's not that great. He's not someone who's shown that he elevates his game in the playoffs. Even like Aldridge, he's not been having like great playoffs. Like a couple of years ago in that Western Conference Finals, like after Kawhi went out against the Warriors, like Aldridge was like, he couldn't elevate a team like by himself like completely, and Draymond Green just took him out of that series. Like, so it's not like Spurs do have more playoff experience, but it's not like those players have shown that they elevated their games to another level in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to be a great test for Denver. I think we know that they've overproduced this whole year, and this is the time for them to show to the rest of the Western Conference that they're here to stay, right? If they lose this series, I don't think that that's the end of their run, obviously, because they're also young, but I think it puts a big dent in their I'm here to stay. I think they want to show that last year was their, the quote-unquote year where the young team comes in and has to take the punches and learns from them. I think missing out on the playoffs in the very last game of last season to Minnesota was them taking that punch, and they have to show that this year that they're ready for being in the playoffs and ready for not just being in the playoffs but producing in the playoffs.
Yeah, that's true. I think it'll be exciting to see who do you ultimately like in this series.
I mean, I think Denver wins this. Like you said, home court advantage. They also have been San Antonio has also been together for a while, but I think the one good thing about Denver from a lot of the Western Conference and Eastern Conference teams is that they haven't had much turnover in terms of their best players, and so they have a little bit of harmony. So yeah, they haven't had playoff experience, but if you look at someone like Philadelphia, who was in the playoffs last year, their team is completely different. So does that playoff experience for those few people really matter that much compared to Denver, who's been playing together for a couple of years now?
Yeah, the same. I mean, I think I like Denver too in this series. I think it might go. Yeah, I think it may go 7 games, just because I'm not sure how equipped Denver is to win those road games. And San Antonio is a great home team, so especially for that's where I think the lack of experience will come in on the road. But the fact that they have that game 7 at home, I think that'll be good for them.
Yeah, I agree. I think I was going to say Denver in 7 as well.
All right. So who do you want to hit on next?
Man, all these Western Conference teams that are left are going to be super exciting. I guess we'll finish off the Eastern Conference. Boston, Indiana is the first one that was sort of set in stone. I think these two teams have been dancing around each other for a while now, with who's going to get the 4th seed and who's going to get the 5th seed. And unfortunately, I think the series could have been way more exciting if Oladipo was there, and he's not, of course. Which I think is a huge advantage for Boston. That's not to say Indiana has underproduced since Oladipo went down. I think Bogdanovich has done an amazing job changing his game mid-season, essentially. I mean, this was a guy who was thought of as a defensive liability, and now last year we saw him guarding LeBron. Obviously, not to the best of his he's not a LeBron stopper by any means, but he held his own. And this year he's showing that he's more than just a spot-up shooter. He's a much more valuable offensive asset and probably earned himself a lot of money. But ultimately, I think Boston just has way too much talent on their side. And the one piece of talent that's really important that they have this year that they didn't last year is playoff Kyrie, who we know is a killer. If the games are close at the end, you know that he's going to come through for you. And as long as Boston doesn't implode, I can see them walking away from this series maybe being even more harmonious than they were before.
Yeah, I think that's been the key for Boston all year, because we see that they have the most talent by far in the Eastern Conference, but it's been that chemistry and the harmony that's been throwing them off all year. And now it's the time for them to walk the walk, because all the times that they were having trouble in the regular season, they kept saying, especially Kyrie, he's like, I'm tired of the regular season bullshit, just want to get to the playoffs. So I mean, the playoffs are here, so now's the time. And I'm sure Kyrie will come through, but just a matter of how they play together as a team. Because the Celtics are I feel like this whole season they've been the ultimate front runners. When when times are good and when they're playing together, like they're getting wins, they're like a really good team. But as soon as they get hit with some like adversity, or a team like comes at them, and then it's like a close game, or then they kind of like fold, especially when they're playing to lesser competition. But that team plays together and hard, and that's exactly what Indiana is. But what about the Smart injury? Like, how do you think that's going to affect Boston?
I think it's huge, actually. I think that they're had they played a different team where I thought that they needed to be, A1 on their defensive end, I think that would be a huge problem for missing Smart, because he's by and far the best defender on their team, both in the team setting and in the individual setting. He's probably at least on the first or second all defensive team this year. And his injury, although they make it sound like it's quite small, it sounds like a pretty large injury to me. And even when he does come back, I don't know if he's going to be able to have the lateral quickness that he'll need. And so I think that's a big loss for Boston. The only positive thing from it is that they have one less player. And I think that the one thing that they have been struggling with all year is they had just too many bodies to try to fit into a roster. And so, last year they were missing Kyrie and Hayward, and we could arguably say that those were their two best players. Maybe just this is addition by subtraction by just having someone missing. And I don't know if that's a radical take, but that's what I feel. Maybe missing him is going to be a good thing for them overall, even though it'll be bad for them defensively.
Yeah, I mean, now you could just put Jaylen Brown in the starting lineup. Split the minutes, like you said, with one less person, which could be good for this team. But, I mean, Smart, I think more than his on-the-court play, from everything like I've read and heard, like, he's kind of their emotional leader, and the guy, like, when Kyrie's maybe, like, complaining about the young guys, like, he'll, like, talk to the young guys, and he's kind of that, like, medium between Kyrie and the young guys. And now they're going to miss it. I mean, he'll still be there on the bench and stuff, but it's a different when you're actually playing in the game and on the court. So it's bad timing. I mean, it's probably better timing for Boston in the sense that maybe they don't need him for Indiana, but they'll definitely miss him if he's not available for that second round series. But I think ultimately Boston will take this in 5 games. I think those last couple games against Indiana in the end of the regular season, Boston showed that, if they get it together, that the Indiana, unfortunately, without Oladipo, it's going to be tough for them to stay in this series with Boston.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was actually going to say I could see them. Indiana has a pretty good home court as well. I could see them holding on to 2 games. So I think probably Boston in 6.
Yeah. So ultimately, I think we both like Boston.
Now we're down to 2 of the more exciting series in the playoff picture. I think both of these series are amazing. I think all 4 of the teams are really talented. What do you want to talk about next?
We could talk about Houston and Utah. Another rematch from last year. I think this was the semifinals last year in the Western Conference. So they're meeting a round earlier, and pretty much both teams are very much the same in terms of their core players. Like with the Rockets, you still have Harden, Capella, CP3, Tucker, and then with the Jazz, you still have Rubio, Mitchell, Gobert, Favors, Crowder. I think the one actually big difference is Rubio didn't play in that series last year because he was hurt, so he'll be there. But it's not a lot much has changed. But the one thing I do like about the Jazz this year is I feel like they started to play at closing lineups with Crowder instead of Favors. And that kind of opened things up for them because then you have an extra shooter for Mitchell. But who do you like? I mean, what are your thoughts on the series?
Well, I think this is the series of both teams coming in a little bit scorching hot, right? Like Houston had a really tough start to the season. Utah had a little bit of a tough start to the season, which was a little bit unprecedented because both teams, like you said, had the same core. Donovan Mitchell really struggled in the beginning of the season. And then we already know what Harden is all about. We already know what Paul is all about. So there's no questioning Houston's abilities. It's more so going to be about Utah and are they going to be able to scheme these players. The toughest thing is going to be who's going to guard James Harden from the Utah team. They're a really talented defensive team, but I think that the one thing that they are probably weakest at is wing defending. And James Harden, not the traditional wing, but if you put him against someone that's small like Mitchell, I think he'll just shoot over him. And I think if you put someone like Crowder on him, I think he'll be able to cherry pick a lot of fouls on someone who I think plays with using his hands quite a bit. The one matchup that is kind of secretly going to be really exciting for me is going to be Gobert versus Clint Capella, because I think that they both are perfect for their systems. I think Gobert is an amazing defensive player and Clint Capella is a rim runner, but neither of them are the focal point of their offense. So it's going to be who can win that matchup, because I think that's going to ultimately be the deciding factor, because Mitchell's going to show up and hopefully get his, and Paul is going to do his great thing. James Harden's probably going to drop 50 at least once in this series. And so I think it's those big guys in the back who might be the ones that dictate who's going to win this series.
Yeah, and Utah is like good at defending. Like last year, like they were good at defending guys like Russell Westbrook because they could just channel him into Gobert, and that's like the essence of their defense. Basically, like give guys driving lanes, take away the three, channel them into Gobert. But it's easy to do that when you know someone like Westbrook. He's just gonna keep attacking the rim at all costs, and you don't mind that because he's going to continuously do that. But I think Harden's a guy who like kind of figures out what the defense is going to give him and not, and he has everything he has a more well-rounded offensive game. So there's really no stopping Harden. It's like how much they can take away the other guys, and I think teams have almost like started resorting to that. It's like let Harden get his, and we're just going to start double teaming him and like give the other guys open threes and take our chances, and that's what Utah may end up having to do ultimately.
Yeah, I think Utah, this is the year where they can show what they're made of, right? Last year was the year where they came a little bit out of nowhere with Donovan Mitchell producing much quicker than what was expected. And now this team has been together for a while.
Yeah, that too. And I was just going to say, like, last year they were super banged up with, like, no Rubio. Even Mitchell got hurt during the series because after that tough OKC series. So they're coming in more healthy this year. And actually, the one addition I do like for Utah is Korver. I think we haven't talked about him much. Just another shooter for Mitchell to space the floor. I think that's going to help him a lot, especially in the playoffs. And Korver's a guy who's been there in the playoffs quite a bit and has finals experience. So that should help this Utah team.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I mean, I as much as I hate to watch him, I think James Harden might be too much for Utah. I do expect this to be a really competitive series, which I think is a bad thing for whoever makes it to the next round and probably plays Golden State, because I think both of these teams could give Golden State a little bit of trouble, but not a well-rested Golden State team. So I think I can probably see Houston taking this in 6.
Yeah, I think I'll take the Rockets in 5. Like just like you said, I think Utah's going to struggle. Like I think it's going to be one of those series where it's 5 games, but it's a close 5 games. Where because of Utah's like good defense, but I think it's just going to be too hard on the other end for Utah to keep up with the Houston when Utah's on offense. Yeah, exactly. I think it's just going to be too much for them. So it's a bad matchup, unfortunately, for Utah. I'm sure they would have loved to draw Portland instead of Utah, but Portland instead of Houston, but can't help the draw sometimes.
Yeah. The last few games of this season were quite remarkable because we weren't quite sure what Denver was doing. Were they trying to tank? Wasn't quite sure what was happening with these teams in terms of trying to make seeding work out. But we can talk about the last series, which I think is definitely going to be the most competitive series, and how all the stars had to align for OKC essentially to have the series that they do. I think OKC Portland is going to be a lot of fun. I think both teams have a lot to prove after last year, right? I mean, OKC lost to Utah, almost embarrassingly so for a Utah team that was sort of the young guns. Somehow, even though that happened and Paul George was kind of destroyed last year, he came back to the team and has been remarkable for most of this year until he got that shoulder injury. And then Portland obviously was really, really, really embarrassed last year after having an amazing season. That they were the 3rd seed last year too, and sort of the wheels fell off when they saw the prowess of Anthony Davis. And so this is the year of resurrection for either one of these teams. Fortunately for OKC, Portland is coming in quite banged up. I mean, McCollum has been dealing with injury for the most of the second half of the season, and the guy that's going to be missing that I think would have been the difference maker here is Nurkic. Missing him to be there to guard Steven Adams or slow them down, or even just to be the guy in the paint for exactly what you said. Slow down Russell Westbrook when he gets to the bucket. I think that's ultimately the worst thing that could have happened. I mean, if Enes Kanter is starting for Portland or Collins is going to start for Portland, it's going to be miserable because they'll just keep running pick and rolls, and I mean, Westbrook is just going to feast if that happens.
Yeah, especially since Cantor used to play for the Thunder, so I'm sure they know exactly how to attack Cantor. They know his deficiencies and how to attack him. So just the loss of Nurkic is just terrible. But yeah, I mean, like you said, it couldn't have worked out better for OKC, where I think with like 4 games left, they were the number 8 seed. So they were looking at the prospect of facing the Warriors in the first round. Would have just been a colossal like defeat for them. But now they probably drew the best of the top 4 seeds. I mean, the matchup wise in Portland, just because of how much they're weakened and banged up. So they got the best possible matchup. So I think even though they're the lower seed, they actually should be the favorites in this. The only way I see Portland having a chance is they have to hope Russell Westbrook is erratic and takes a lot of threes, and playoff P he has to like not be playoff P and perform like and be like last year and like just struggle, and that's pretty much the only way. Because I mean, if you go through OKC like swept them in the regular season, like they won all 4 games, and that was even when Nurkic was playing. Like now no Nurkic, and so unfortunately it's a tough draw for Portland, which is why I didn't understand why they wanted to win that game. I mean, it looked like they wanted to lose, but somehow like those G League players like took them to a victory, which I don't know if they wanted to, because now they drew the OKC instead of like getting to play Utah. And I think we were texting about this, that now at least they avoid Golden State in the second round, but I think like a team like Portland, after getting swept, it's like almost like you should worry about just getting out of the first round first. Yeah. And then if you lose to Golden State in the second round, like that's like completely understandable. No one's going to fault you for that. But like now another first round loss for Portland, that's going to be pretty bad for them.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a horrible matchup, and I think this has been the bane of the existence of teams that have had a good 1-2 backcourt punch, right? I mean, we saw that used to be the Raptors until DeRozan was gone, because it just didn't work out there. We've seen what a colossal mess that's been for Wall and Beal, even when Wall was healthy. And the one that had been succeeding with that kind of reliance in terms of offensive support has been Portland. But what we've seen is it's a great regular season thing, but in the playoffs it's really hard, especially because both those guys are a little bit undersized. And so now I assume they're probably going to put Paul George on Damian Lillard during crunch time, if not the whole game. And that's if you can neutralize Dame, where's Portland going to generate any offense from?
That's a good question. Like, it's looking kind of bleak. I mean, you get maybe CJ, but even that, I think I read this somewhere where it was saying that the point differentials are so like Paul George. So the difference between him off the court and on the court is like a 17-point differential.
Wow.
And that's number 1 in the league, right? And number 2 is Dame. So that's just great, and hits 16-point differential. Wow. I guess in the playoffs, the thing is like everybody plays like, especially the star players, they're playing like 40 minutes or more in the playoffs. Because you don't worry about like depth in the playoffs as much because you're having the days off. So I guess Dame is going to be pretty much on the court, but I think New Orleans last year pretty much gave us the blueprint of beating this Blazers in the playoffs, where you just like every Dame Lillard pick and roll, you just put two guys on him,
on Dame,
and just put 2 and blitz him and just say like, all right, some with the other 4 guys on the floor beat us because we're not going to let Lillard beat us.
Yeah. And I think Westbrook is a little bit of a matchup disaster for them, both for McCollum and Lillard. I feel like they're both, may try hard on defense, but they're both a little bit undersized, and I think Westbrook is going to have a nice offensive series if he can get to the paint. The question is going to be, where's the outside shooting from Thunder going to come if Westbrook is going to drive to the paint and kick it out, besides Paul George?
Yeah, I think both teams are a little bit lacking in shooting. It's like you said, the Thunder. I mean, Terrence Ferguson is pretty much like hit or miss. The loss, like, this is one underrated thing. I think people didn't like Alex Abrinas. I think we don't really know what happened. They just said it was a personal issue. So he left the team. So that he was one of their big like stretch the floor guys with the three. He's actually a bigger loss than I think people are realizing for them, especially the way they struggled after the All-Star break with those losses. Because they basically have no shooting. If Terrence Ferguson and Jeremy Grant, Abdel Nader, like all these guys, they're very hit or miss on threes. Like the games that they're making it, OKC will win. When they don't, then it's like you kind of need Paul George to do a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately for Portland, both seasons, last season and this season, they've been getting into the playoffs a little bit compromised. I think last year CJ had an injury towards the end of the season that had him hobbled. I don't think he missed any games, but and then this year losing Nurkic, it just seems like the basketball gods have been against them.
Yep. So who do you like? I mean, I think I'll just go with. I think ultimately I like OKC in 6 in this series because Game 6 will be in Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
And I think they'll close out the Blazers in 6.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think Dame can easily win 1 or 2 games, and I think that's what he'll do.
Yep. All right, man. This is good. Like getting through the matchups now. Let's see if like when the games actually start, how they play out. Because it's always like fun to like analyze this stuff, but until they actually start playing them, you never know.
Yeah, I just want to give a quick shout out to Dirk and Wade and whoever is listening. I think those two guys went about retiring in a dramatically different way, with Wade sort of touring around the basketball scene all year long, and Dirk doing what he quietly did, which is just duck away from the limelight and then just say on the very last day that he's ready to go. But both those guys, amazing careers. Want to just thank them for pretty much entertaining us for the last 15 to 20 years for both of them, and so the NBA is gonna be very different without them.
Yeah, 2 incredible careers, and especially, I mean, Wade, like, I think his highlight moment will always be those 2006 finals, and Dirk is just some guy, like, he more than like the individual games, just the way he changed the whole NBA, where like he was the first like real stretch 4 or even like stretch 5, like when he was playing center, and now it's like become so common that big men can shoot.
Yeah, and he led this great revolution for international players having a chance here, and so he's changed a lot of lives. Wade has changed a lot of lives, for sure has changed what basketball has meant to both of us, and so I'm glad to see that. I think at least Wade is going to stick around, probably at some point come back. He's too much of a personality to stay out of basketball for too long.
Yeah, whether it's media, I definitely can see him getting into media. Pretty quickly, and he said he's going to be living a lot more in LA next year. So I think he should have plenty of media opportunities.
Exactly.
All right, man. Can't wait for these games to start.
Yeah, time to kick back, relax, and watch some amazing basketball.
Yep. All right. So let's see how the games play out, and then hopefully by the next time we talk, we'll have a little bit more to analyze on these series.
Sounds good. Later, man.
All right. See ya.